You ever feel like a failure? I mean, I know I have, and it's it's strange because you work so hard and you stay disciplined and you start stacking wins, and your confidence grows because you've earned it. You've got proof that what you're doing works. Things begin making sense. You can predict outcomes with accuracy because your knowledge and your skill are improving. And then one day, it's like you just hit a wall. And it's not like a small setback. It's like you face first into a wall that's invisible. It's like stepping into a fight where you think you're totally going to win and then realizing in seconds that you are completely outmatched and you don't know what to do. And you're left thinking, well, what just happened? Did I just suddenly forget how to fight? And the answer is no. It's just you weren't prepared for that level. The wall isn't the end of your progress. It's the beginning of that next level. Every new level introduces variables that you do not yet know how to account for. That means the outcomes become less predictable for a while. Sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail. Failure isn't a problem. It's what happens after failure that can become the problem, because somewhere along the way you stop saying I failed and instead you start saying I am a failure. And those are two completely different statements. One describes an outcome while the other is describing an identity. And once you confuse the two, growth becomes almost impossible because look, failure is not the enemy. It's one of reality's ways of showing you where your current capacity ends and nothing more, nothing less. That's just it. And the challenge is that you usually don't experience failure as data like that, though. You experience it emotionally. And that's normal, right? Your emotions are trying to tell you something important happened, but your emotions are not an accurate assessment of what is actually going on. Think about the last time that you missed a goal. You had an expectation. You picture how things are going to happen, how they're going to unfold in your head, but reality produces a completely different outcome. And the greater the gap between what you expect and what actually happens, the greater the emotional response usually is. But, the emotional response isn't evidence that you're incapable. It's just evidence that your current understanding was incomplete. And that's a very different conclusion. I learned this lesson when I was about, I guess I was about 22, and I was training boxing at the time, and I got paired with a guy who was about my height, but about 100 pounds heavier than me, right? Which I immediately assumed he would be slower, and I just beat him with speed. That was not an assessment, definitely not a correct assessment. That was a prediction. But then when we started sparring, I got wrecked. Not because he was bigger, but because his technique was so much better than mine. Speed didn't matter. I just couldn't get him, right? And that day taught me something I will never forget, is that consistency and skill will beat assumptions. It wasn't that reality embarrassed me so much as that the reality of what happened educated me. It showed me exactly where my ability to consistently produce the outcome that I wanted or predict the outcome that I wanted ended, because I just didn't have the skill to do that yet. It was the next level, right? If I had have walked away just thinking I wasn't good enough, though, I'd have missed that lesson completely. But instead, I learned to ask a different kind of question. And the question is, what is reality showing me that I don't understand yet? And that's a question that I feel changes everything, because if you want a life that you have never had, you are going to have to become a version of yourself that you've never been. And that version, I do not believe is discovered. I believe you have to deliberately build that version. And you build it by increasing your capacity physically, financially, emotionally, mentally. These are not separate goals, right? These are 4 pillars that determine what you are capable of managing. And as your capacity grows, the lifestyle and the life experiences available to you grow with it. So the question isn't whether you're going to fail. The question has to be, what are you going to do with the information that failure gives you? Here's the process I use. Whenever something doesn't turn out the way I expected it to, I ask myself 3 questions. 1, what went right? That's important. What Everything didn't go wrong. What went right? Now, what happened different than what I expected to happen? And then 3, what is one next step that I can take to become the version of myself that would have made a more accurate prediction? Those 3 questions force me to assess before I just react emotionally, right? They keep me focused on building capacity instead of trying to protect my ego. Because every answer points towards the next version of myself, the version of myself that can execute. Not the final version, just the very next version, right? And that's how, how I believe growth actually works. You don't become exceptional all at once. You become a little more capable every time the reality shows you something you didn't know before. The next time you don't get the outcome that you expected to, don't ask yourself if you are a failure. Just ask yourself, what does reality just show me? And then build from there. Because failure is not there to tell you who you are and become your identity. It is showing you exactly what you need to build. So, mentor the beast and let's go build that life you want. Let's go.